The tip of his nose was just inches from mine. His breath was steady, eyes locked into mine like they'd finally found the right frequency. Outside, the sound of cicadas filled the summer air, and the only light came from the kitchen window behind us. We weren't supposed to be standing this close. Not at this hour. Not like this. Not with paint still drying on the walls we'd been working on all day. I could still smell the dust, the old wood, the faint sweetness of bourbon from the mug he poured an hour ago. We hadn't touched it since. He leaned in ever so slightly. I didn't flinch. My hand hovered near his on the countertop, neither of us daring to close that gap. The silence between us was so heavy it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. And just before something irreversible could happen. The sound of tires on gravel outside. Headlights. Then the front door opened. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? The smell of charcoal and grilled corn lingered in the late summer air, mixing with the sharp scent of bug spray and beer. Laughter echoed across the backyard, the kind of laughter that feels forced when everyone's been standing too long, beer getting warm in their hand. My husband stood with a spatula in one hand and his phone in the other, barely looking up as I passed by with a tray of burger buns. "Hey, hon, grab me another bud, would you?" he called without looking. I didn't respond. I just went inside and grabbed the beer. I'd done this every Labor Day for the past 10 years. The same friends. The same jokes. The same bratwursts that nobody touched. I knew this rhythm like the beat of a dull headache. By 7, the sun dipped behind the trees and the kids were running barefoot through the grass while the men argued about football. I sat alone on a patio chair, legs crossed, picking at the condensation on my glass of sweet tea. No one noticed. Or maybe they were just polite enough not to ask what was wrong. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. I watched my husband as he laughed with his best friend by the fire pit, a laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. When had I stopped existing to him? Somewhere between bills and grocery runs and dentist appointments, I'd slipped through the cracks. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," came a voice behind me. I turned. It was his nephew. I'd met him only twice before, holidays, quick hellos. He was taller than I remembered. Late 20s, maybe. Tan, clean cut, a little rough around the edges. His white t-shirt was smudged with what looked like grease and sawdust. "Was working all day," he said, noticing me glance at the mess. "Helping my buddy fix up a rental." "On Labor Day?" "Time and a half," he smirked. "Plus, I kinda like it. It keeps my head clear." I nodded, unsure why he was talking to me. He didn't strike me as the polite small-talk type. He pulled up the chair next to mine and slumped into it like he belonged there. "You know, your uncle's been meaning to fix up that lake house for years," he said. "He was just telling me about it earlier today." "Yeah," I said, eyes on my glass. "It's been falling apart forever." "I could help," he added casually. "If you need someone." I looked at him. That caught me off guard. "You'd do that?" He shrugged. "Sure. Not like I've got much else tying me down this month." I don't know what made me say yes. Maybe it was the way his offer felt simple, no strings, no pity. Or maybe I just needed to feel like someone noticed the silence I lived in every day. The next morning, while my husband was packing for a last-minute fishing trip to Vermont with his buddies, something I hadn't even heard about until I saw the duffel on the bed, I mentioned it to him. "I thought I'd head up to the lake house this week," I said. "Start cleaning it up a bit. Your nephew offered to help." He didn't even pause zipping the bag. "That's great. Get out of the house. You'll like that." That was it. No questions. No hesitation. 2 days later, I pulled up to the lake house. It had the charm of something once loved and now forgotten, shutters hanging crooked, porch steps creaking like arthritic knees. The place was still standing, but barely. He was already there. His truck was parked sideways on the gravel. The back was full of lumber, tools, and buckets of white paint. "Hope you don't mind I got started," he said, waving as I got out. "Figured we'd knock out the kitchen walls first. Mold starting to set in." Inside, it was worse than I remembered. The floorboards moaned with every step. A layer of dust coated the windows so thick it muted the sun. "Do you ever stop moving?" I asked as I set down my bag. He grinned. "Not unless I'm sleeping." We worked all morning. We tore down cabinet doors, stripped wallpaper, and started gutting the pantry. His energy was relentless, steady, practical, focused. Every now and then he'd glance my way with something like amusement, as if he couldn't quite figure me out. At lunch, we sat on the porch with tuna sandwiches and chips. "You ever think about what you'd do if you could start over?" he asked suddenly, chewing thoughtfully. "Start over from what?" I asked. "Anything. Job. Marriage. Life." I didn't answer. That afternoon, we drove 20 miles to the nearest hardware store, a sleepy little Ace Hardware where the cashier talked about her tomato garden for 5 full minutes. We bought too many nails and not enough paint. On the way back, he asked what I used to do before I was married. "Teach," I said. "English." He nodded, then added, "You talk like someone who reads." I talk like someone who forgot she used to. We laughed. It felt strange to laugh. But the ease of it, the fact that it had nothing to do with obligation, made it feel dangerous. That night, I stayed in the master bedroom, and he took the guest room across the hall. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Everything felt too quiet. Too uncertain. Like something had been nudged out of place and would never quite go back. The next morning, he had already brewed coffee by the time I woke up. I found him on the front porch with a mug and the newspaper. "I made extra," he said without looking up. We worked through the day without rest. Around 4 p.m., I got a call from my husband. "Hey," he said. "Just letting you know we're extending the trip a couple more days. Might swing by my brother's in Maine afterward. You good?" I looked around the empty kitchen. The smell of paint hung heavy in the air. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." That night, I stood by the window as the sun went down. The lake shimmered in gold and blue. He was still hammering something in the hallway, humming under his breath. And then a truck pulled up. Dust kicked in the air as tires crunched the gravel. The driver stepped out. It was my husband's best friend. He looked up, straight at me through the window. And he didn't smile. He didn't move from the gravel driveway. One hand on the truck door, the other resting casually in his pocket, like he'd been standing there for hours just waiting for this exact moment. I froze by the window. Behind me, the hammering stopped. The hallway fell silent except for the faint creak of floorboards as he stepped toward the living room. "You expecting company?" he asked. I didn't answer. My eyes were still locked on the man outside. My husband's best friend, Mark. Mark had always been a fixture at barbecues and game nights. He was the kind of man who laughed too loud, told the same fishing stories twice, and had an endless rotation of girlfriends no one ever met twice. But now he stood there with a stillness that made my stomach knot. By the time I reached the front door, Mark was already climbing the steps. He didn't wait to be invited in. "Place looks worse than I thought," he said, glancing around the porch like it had personally offended him. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Was in the area. Thought I'd check on things. Your husband mentioned you were up here. His eyes flicked past me toward the kitchen, where my husband's nephew leaned casually against the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. They exchanged a short nod, neither friendly nor hostile, but there was something heavy in the air between them. Mark stepped inside without asking, walking slowly like he was taking inventory. His boots echoed against the old floorboards, every step pulling my nerves tighter. You've got water damage in that corner, he said, pointing to the far wall. If you don't deal with it now, the whole thing'll rot. I crossed my arms. We've got it under control. You? He looked at me, then at the man behind me. Or him. The way he said it wasn't mocking, but it wasn't casual either. It was a challenge. We're making progress, my husband's nephew said, stepping forward just enough to close the space between them by a few inches. Kitchen's halfway done. Mark gave a small smirk. Kitchen first, huh? Interesting choice. Thought the roof would be more urgent. For the next hour, Mark stayed. Not helping. Not leaving. Just lingering. He'd follow us into whatever room we worked in, offering comments that were halfway between advice and criticism. Every time I turned around, I'd catch him watching, not in an obvious way, but enough to make my chest tighten. Around sunset, he finally stood. Well, he said, brushing his hands together, I'll be back in a couple days to see how you're doing. Maybe bring some tools. That won't be necessary, I said too quickly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll see you soon. When his truck finally disappeared down the dirt road, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. We went back to work, but the rhythm was gone. The silence between us felt different now, like it was holding a question neither of us wanted to voice. By the time we stopped for the night, the air in the house felt thick. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain in the wood, when he walked in with 2 mugs of tea. You didn't tell me he might show up, he said. I didn't know he would. He sat across from me. You think he's just checking in? I shook my head. No. He's never driven 2 hours just to check in on anything in his life. We drank our tea in silence. The next morning, the weather turned. Wind swept off the lake, slamming the old shutters against the siding. Inside, the walls groaned. We worked through it, but every creak made me glance toward the window, half expecting to see that same truck pulling in again. Around midday, the power flickered, then died. No storm warning? I asked. He shook his head, already grabbing a flashlight. Could be the lines. I'll check the fuse box first. We found the problem, a blown fuse. But when he went to replace it, the entire box was damp. This isn't from today, he said, shining the light inside. This is months of water getting in. We spent the next 2 hours dragging buckets and tarps into the attic, shoving insulation aside to find the leak. It wasn't one spot. It was 3. By late afternoon, the rain eased, but the damage was worse than we'd thought. I called the local supply store to see if they had replacement panels. The woman on the other end hesitated before saying, "Oh, you're up at the old Parker place?" Someone else called this morning asking about the same thing. Who? I asked, but she didn't know. That night, we sat on the porch with a single lamp between us, sorting through the mess of receipts and supply lists. Somewhere out on the lake, a boat engine growled and faded into the distance. Then I saw headlights. The same truck. Mark didn't come to the door this time. He stopped halfway up the driveway, got out, and leaned against the hood, staring at the house. We didn't move. After a long minute, he walked to the back of his truck, pulled something out too far to see in the dark, and set it down on the ground. Then he got back in and drove away without a word. We waited until his taillights vanished before going to look. It was a single cardboard box. Inside, neatly stacked, labeled, and dated, were photographs. Every one of them was of the lake house. Some from years ago, some as recent as last week. And in the newest ones, I was in the frame. He carried the box inside while I followed him through the doorway, rainwater dripping off the hem of my jeans. The photographs were neatly arranged, too neat. Every shot framed deliberately, the porch, the windows, the gravel path, the lake in different lights. But it was the recent ones that pulled the air from my lungs. I was in them. Walking with a toolbox. Laughing with him by the truck. Leaning against the front door, mid-sentence. Always unaware. We laid them out on the kitchen table, the soft buzz of the overhead bulb barely lighting the corners. The air inside felt colder now, like someone had peeled back the roof and let something in. Something we didn't invite. Neither of us said much. He flipped through the stack with careful fingers while I hovered at the edge of the room, arms crossed, staring. Mark hadn't needed to say anything. The message was in the silence of that box. He'd seen enough. And now, he wanted us to know that. The next morning, I woke to the sound of movement downstairs. He was already dressed, shirt damp with sweat, carrying a crowbar and a rolled-up tarp. I joined him without a word. We pulled out the cabinets, stripped the backsplash. The work was mechanical, fast, relentless, as if neither of us wanted to leave space for thinking. The kitchen filled with the sound of splintering wood and clanging nails. By midday, the sky cleared. We opened all the windows. Fresh air rushed in, brushing against the backs of our necks like a warning. We broke for lunch. He handed me a sandwich wrapped in paper towel. I ate it on the porch, watching a squirrel dart through the trees. His voice came from behind me, low and careful. "You think he's gonna tell your husband?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have thoughts. Because I had too many. He dropped into the chair next to me. "Maybe we should stop." The sentence hung there like a nail half-driven. I nodded slowly. But something in me resisted. Later that afternoon, we ran out of nails. He offered to drive into town, said he'd be quick. I stayed behind, rinsing out brushes and stacking old tiles by the shed. By the time he returned, it was past 6. He looked pale, unsettled. I opened the passenger door to grab the supplies, and saw it. A small envelope on the seat. My name. In my husband's handwriting. He'd seen him. He handed it to me without speaking. I took it but didn't open it. Just walked inside and set it on the nightstand. We didn't talk for the rest of the evening. We each ate in silence, on opposite ends of the kitchen. The air between us had shifted again, not angry, not sad, just heavy. Like the moments before a storm. Before bed, I went for a walk along the edge of the lake. The water was perfectly still. Not a single ripple. The clouds glowed with a faint orange haze from the distant town. I stayed out there for over an hour. When I came back, he was still up. Sitting by the fireplace, shoes off, flipping through a notebook filled with renovation plans. He looked up. No words. Just a question in his eyes. I sat beside him. We stared at the fire for a long while. I don't remember who moved first. We kissed. The next morning, I opened the envelope. It wasn't a letter. It was a grocery list. Bananas. Dog food. Toothpaste. On the back, scribbled, like an afterthought, a note. Found this in your car. Thought it was hers. Guess I was wrong. My chest tightened. He hadn't meant to leave it. It wasn't for me. I went outside. He was by the shed, cutting plywood. I told him about the list. He paused, then nodded, almost like it made sense. We packed the photos back into the box. Drove it to town. Found the nearest dumpster behind an abandoned diner and left it there without ceremony. On the way back, we stopped at a roadside farm stand. Picked up cider, apples, some late-season corn. The woman who rang us up gave us a knowing smile. "Fixing up the old Parker place?" she asked. I froze. "We are," he said. She handed him the bag. Funny. I thought it had already sold. We looked at each other. "What do you mean?" I asked. She tilted her head. "There was a sold sign out front last week. Gone now, but I remember. Man came in here asking about local contractors. Said he'd just closed on it." "Did he say his name?" She thought for a moment. "No, but I remember the hat. Yankees cap. Black Ford. Out-of-state plates." We left without saying much. Back at the house, I checked the mailbox. Inside, just a real estate flyer. New properties, price slashes, call now headlines. But nothing about this house. I opened the drawer near the fridge and found the papers from the last time we came up here. Mortgage, utilities, tax forms. Nothing looked recent. Nothing looked right. I called the county clerk's office. Asked if the house had changed ownership. They asked my name. I gave it. Long pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the voice said. "This property hasn't been in your name since August 3rd. That was almost a month ago." I hung up. Stood in the middle of the kitchen. He came in behind me, wiping his hands. "What's wrong?" I turned to him. "We don't own this house anymore." The words hung in the air, thick with something I couldn't place. The realization hit harder than I expected. We didn't own this house anymore. My mind couldn't catch up with what my mouth had already said. The silence that followed stretched longer than it should have, like the moment when you know something's about to break but haven't figured out how or when. He didn't move. He didn't say anything at first. His face remained blank, expressionless. It was like I wasn't even talking to him. He glanced around, his eyes slowly moving over the room, the walls, the floorboards, as if he were seeing the house for the first time. I stood frozen, waiting for him to say something, anything. But it was like he had become part of the silence. "Wait," he finally said, his voice a little too calm. "What do you mean? The house is still in our names, right?" "No," I shook my head. "It's not. We haven't owned it since August." The realization dawned on him, and for a brief moment, his eyes flickered with confusion, then panic. He looked at the counter, his fingers digging into the edge. "But I don't understand." "I don't either," I whispered, barely audible. The words felt heavy, like stones in my chest. "I don't know who took it or why, but it's gone. Officially gone." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing a few steps back. I could hear his boots scraping against the floor, sharp and nervous. I couldn't stop myself from turning to the window again, watching the distant trees. The world outside seemed so far removed, so calm in comparison. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. This place was supposed to be our escape. There was a flicker of anger in his eyes as he turned back to me. "So, what do we do now?" he asked, his voice laced with urgency. "Do you have any idea who took it? Why would anyone want to steal a house?" I didn't have answers. I had theories, but they didn't sound rational, not even in my own head. My fingers trembled as I reached for the papers in the drawer. The county clerk's phone number, the list of contacts. Nothing fit. None of the pieces were falling into place. I don't know, I muttered. But I'm going to find out. I stood up and grabbed my jacket from the chair. Where are you going? He asked, stepping in front of me, blocking my path. We don't even know where to look. I'll figure it out. He stared at me for a long moment, as though weighing my words. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped. Something flickered behind his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. And then, to my surprise, he stepped aside. I pulled the door open and walked out, the cold evening air rushing past me. The drive to the county office was long, longer than it had ever felt before. The usual landmarks seemed strange, the worn gas stations, the flashing neon lights of local diners. Everything felt distant, like I was no longer in the same world. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know who I was supposed to talk to. But I was going to find someone who had answers, even if it was the last thing I did. I parked the car in front of the old brick building. The sign above the door was faded, the letters barely visible in the dimming light. I stepped out and pulled my collar up against the chill, the air thick with the promise of rain. The doors creaked open as I stepped inside. The smell of old paper, dust, and stale coffee hit me immediately. Behind the counter, a woman with graying hair and glasses looked up, her eyes narrowing as I approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I need to speak to someone about a property," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I found out that a house I own isn't in my name anymore." She raised an eyebrow, folding her arms. "What's the address?" I gave her the details, the same ones I had looked over 100 times since last night. She typed them into her computer and clicked around for a while, her fingers moving quickly. I stood there, the seconds stretching into minutes. The clicking of her keyboard echoed in the small room. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "The property's been sold," she said, her voice clipped. "Last transaction went through about 2 weeks ago." "What do you mean sold?" "I didn't sell it." She glanced back at her screen. "It's marked as sold." The buyer's name was, she paused, looking at me. "Well?" I pressed. "Who bought it?" "Sorry, I'm not authorized to give that information." My heart dropped. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I need to know," I said, more forcefully this time. "This is my property, and I need to know who bought it." "I'm sorry, I can't release that," she repeated. I stood frozen, staring at her for a moment, my mind spinning. I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't leave without something, anything, to move forward with. I took a step back, my thoughts racing. "Thank you for your time," I muttered, turning to leave. But as I reached the door, the woman's voice stopped me. "Wait." I turned around. She hesitated for a moment before she spoke again. "I can't give you any details, but you should know the buyer was a man. They paid in cash. The paperwork was rushed. Too rushed." The information hit me like a punch to the gut. Cash. Rushed. Something about that felt wrong. "Thank you," I said through clenched teeth, my mind already spinning with possibilities. I left the office, my hands shaking. I didn't know who had taken the house or why. But I knew one thing, someone had planned this. Someone had been watching us. And that someone wasn't just going to walk away. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly, my eyes scanning the road, trying to make sense of everything. My thoughts tangled together, creating a mess of fear, confusion, and rage. My mind kept circling back to the same question, why would someone steal our house? As I rounded a corner, I saw it, a familiar black truck parked outside a building I had never noticed before. I slowed down. My heart hammered in my chest. The truck was unmistakable. The same one that had been parked outside the house when Mark showed up. I parked down the block and got out, walking slowly toward the building. The sign above the door read Realty Group. I pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and paper. The woman behind the counter looked up, and my heart sank. "Can I help you?" she asked with a smile. I didn't say anything at first. My eyes scanned the room. Then I saw it. A file, open on the desk. The name on the top was mine. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the file on the desk. My name. Right there, on top of the pile. The woman behind the counter noticed my hesitation and smiled, but I could barely process it. All I could think was how everything, all the hours, all the work, all the plans, was now wrapped up in that one file. I walked in, my steps unsure but steady. She didn't say anything, just waited for me to speak. I didn't know how to ask, didn't know where to begin. How could I explain the tangled mess of emotions, confusion, and betrayal swirling inside me? "This file," I started, my voice shaky, "that's mine, isn't it?" The woman's smile faltered for just a moment before she answered. "Yes, it is." "You're interested in the property, correct?" "Yes," I said, forcing the word out. "I need to know why it was sold." "I didn't authorize it." She looked at me, then glanced at the file. "Well, the sale went through legally," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "All the paperwork was processed. It's all in order." My heart hammered. Legally? But I never signed anything. She hesitated, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the desk. "It's strange, I agree. But the buyer, he came in with all the right documentation. It was a quick transaction, cash payment." I took a step forward, reaching for the file. "Can I see who bought it?" "Sorry, I can't give that out," she said, her voice growing colder. "It's private information." I clenched my fists. I'm the owner. I should be able to access the details. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Please, just tell me anything. Anything that can help me understand why this happened." She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Look, all I know is the buyer was very insistent. He even offered a higher price to speed up the process. People like that, they can be hard to say no to. But I'm not supposed to reveal any more. Can you at least tell me when the deal was signed?" I asked, feeling the pressure mounting inside me. "August 3rd, she replied quickly. Everything was completed by the end of the day. That date. August 3rd. The same day the house supposedly left our name. The same day everything began to unravel. I stepped back, my mind racing. I was standing in a room full of questions and no answers. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. I wasn't going to leave without knowing more. I forced a smile, trying to mask the rising anger. "Thank you. I'll be in touch." The woman nodded without a word. I turned and left, walking out of the building with more questions than when I entered. The drive back was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The world outside the car window felt detached, like I was in some kind of dream, a nightmare I couldn't escape. I knew I had to do something. But what? I couldn't just let this go. Whoever had taken the house from us, whoever had forged our names or manipulated the system, was going to pay. I just didn't know how yet. I drove for miles without any destination in mind, my mind swirling with possibilities. There had to be a trail, something that would lead me to the truth. My thoughts circled back to the buyer. The man who had paid cash. The one who had outsmarted us. Eventually, I found myself at the edge of the town, staring at a worn-down strip mall. The signs were faded, some of the stores boarded up. A few cars were parked outside one of the businesses, a small real estate agency I had never noticed before. I didn't even think twice. I parked the car and walked toward the entrance. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and the bell above the door rang softly. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and paper filled the air. A man sat behind the counter, his back turned as he flipped through a stack of papers. His face was lined with age, his hair graying at the temples. I walked up to the counter, my heart pounding in my chest. "I need to ask you something." The man looked up, his eyes sharp but not unfriendly. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information on a property," I said, forcing the words out. "A sale that went through recently. I need to know who bought it." He raised an eyebrow, not surprised by the request. "We handle a lot of properties. You'll have to be more specific." It was the Parker place. The one by the lake. He froze, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The Parker place?" "Yes. The house was sold. I need to know who bought it." His gaze flickered briefly to the side, then back to me. "I don't know anything about that." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice suddenly sharper than I intended. "You know something. Who bought it?" He hesitated. "I'm not supposed to say." "Then let me speak to someone who will," I demanded. "I'm not leaving until I know who is behind this." He looked around the small office, then leaned in closer. "Look, I can't give you all the details. But, the buyer is connected to someone in town. Someone you probably know. His name's Steve." "Steve?" I repeated, confused. "Steve who?" He just shook his head. "That's all I can tell you. You're better off staying away from it." I stood there, my blood running cold. Steve. The name echoed in my mind, but I couldn't place it. It meant nothing to me. But it felt like the key, the link to something bigger. I left the office, my mind spinning. The name Steve. Why did it sound so familiar? It wasn't until I was halfway back to the house that I remembered. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Steve. My husband's best friend. The one who had been so quiet at the barbecue. The one who had been lurking in the background, watching us, knowing more than he should. He had been the one who introduced the idea of fixing up the house. He was the one who had encouraged us to take it on. But what was his role in all of this? My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled over to the side of the road and answered it without checking the number. "Hello?" I said, my voice tight. "Where are you?" It was my husband's voice. "I'm coming back from Vermont. I'll be home in an hour." "Stay where you are," I said quickly. "I need to talk to you. It's important." "About what?" His voice was impatient. "About the house," I said, feeling the weight of it all crash down on me. "About everything." There was a long silence. "What about the house?" he finally asked. "You need to come home right now," I said, my voice shaking. "There's something you don't know. And it's about to change everything." I hung up, staring at the phone. My stomach twisted. This was the moment. The moment I would have to face the truth. Whatever it was no longer something I could run from. I waited for him to arrive, my mind racing with the possibilities. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, but I couldn't stay still. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. The drive home felt endless, the night growing colder with every passing mile. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I saw his car in the distance, headlights cutting through the misty evening air. He was back. It wasn't just the house that had been stolen, it was everything. The trust. The comfort I'd taken for granted. Now, it was all a question. I stepped out of the car and waited on the porch, the cool air biting at my skin. His car came to a slow stop, and I could see him through the windshield, his expression unreadable. The engine cut off, and for a moment everything was silent. He stepped out of the car and walked toward me, his eyes locking with mine. There was a heaviness to his steps, something that felt out of place, like he knew this conversation was inevitable. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked before he could say anything. The words spilled out faster than I intended. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes darting to the ground for a moment before meeting mine again. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I thought I could handle it." "Handle it?" I repeated, frustration building. "Handle what?" "The fact that our house is gone? That someone stole it from us?" "I didn't know how to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." My heart pounded, and the air between us thickened. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to think. Who took it? Why didn't you tell me?" He stood still, his face etched with guilt. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't want you involved. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" The anger in my voice flared. "By keeping the truth from me? By letting it happen in the first place?" "I had no choice," he finally blurted, stepping closer. "I wasn't the one behind it. It was him. Steve. He's been planning this for months." "Steve?" The name hit me like a slap to the face. "What do you mean he's been planning this? What exactly has Steve been doing?" I didn't want to believe it, he continued, his eyes filled with regret. "But when the offer came in, when he said he could get it done so quickly, I couldn't say no. He promised me it was for the best, for both of us. For the family." I shook my head, trying to process his words. "For the family?" The disbelief in my voice was unmistakable. "This isn't just about a house, is it? What aren't you telling me?" His silence spoke volumes. I could see him struggling, his body tense as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "I wasn't just trying to protect you from losing the house. I was trying to protect you from everything that was going to happen next." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Steve was involved in things. Things I couldn't control," he admitted, his voice breaking. "The money, the transactions, it was all tied up with people we shouldn't have gotten involved with." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My legs felt weak, and I had to grip the railing to keep myself from falling. "You're saying this wasn't just a mistake? This wasn't just some bad decision?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "It was a plan. A scheme. And I was too deep in it to pull out. But it's not too late. We can fix this." The offer hung in the air, heavy with both hope and disbelief. "We can't fix this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've already lied to me. You've already let this happen." "I know," he said, his voice pleading. "But I'm telling you now. I'm telling you everything." I turned away from him, my hands pressed against my forehead. The weight of it all was suffocating. "I don't know what to believe anymore," I whispered, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. "I don't know if I can believe you." He took a step forward, reaching for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, don't," I said, my voice firm. "You've broken everything. The trust is gone. I don't even know who you are anymore." "I'm the man who loves you," he said desperately, his voice thick with emotion. I'm the man who made a mistake, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I looked at him, my heart breaking. But the anger, the betrayal, they were too much to ignore. You've already made your choice, I said, my voice steady but cold. And so have I. There was a long silence between us, the weight of everything hanging over us like a dark cloud. His shoulders slumped, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. I could see how much he wanted to fix it, how much he wanted to take everything back. But it was too late. I turned away from him and walked inside, not looking back. He didn't follow. I wasn't sure if that was what I wanted, but at that moment, it was all I could do. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. He was gone. The house felt colder, quieter, even though he had only left a few hours ago. I wasn't sure where he'd gone, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting. I couldn't keep letting him drag me through this mess. I grabbed my coat and headed out. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here anymore. The house, the one that had been stolen, the one that had meant so much, it no longer felt like home. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had to find something. Anything that would give me a sense of control again. As I walked down the driveway, I saw something strange. A car I didn't recognize was parked near the road, hidden behind a cluster of trees. It looked out of place, like it had been waiting. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. The windows were tinted, the engine running. I took a step closer, my mind racing. And then I saw the figure inside. It was Steve. And he wasn't alone. With him, in the passenger seat, was someone I never expected to see again. My best friend. I froze. There, in the passenger seat, was Sarah. My best friend. The one person I never thought would be involved in any of this. I couldn't breathe. My feet felt like they were stuck in the dirt, and the world around me seemed to slow down as I watched them both through the tinted windows. Steve, the man I'd been chasing, the one responsible for everything that had gone wrong, and Sarah, the person who should have had my back through all of this. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to run, but my legs felt heavy, like concrete. Instead, I just stood there, staring at them, wondering if they saw me too. If they knew I was here. They didn't move for a long moment, just sitting there in the car, neither of them looking in my direction. And then, without any warning, Steve turned his head, and our eyes met. For the briefest second, I saw a flash of guilt in his expression. But it was gone so quickly, replaced by the same cold, calculating look he had when he first showed up at the house. I couldn't stay frozen. I couldn't let them think they could just get away with this. I took a deep breath and walked toward the car, my steps slow but determined. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I couldn't let this moment slip away without confronting them. Without getting answers. As I approached the car, Sarah finally noticed me. Her eyes widened, and I could see her tense up. She looked at Steve, then back at me, clearly caught off guard. She didn't say anything, but her mouth moved like she was trying to figure out what to say. Steve, on the other hand, leaned back in his seat, his hand resting casually on the steering wheel, like he had all the time in the world. I stopped just a few feet away, my chest tight with both anger and disbelief. "What's going on, Sarah?" I asked, my voice low and shaking with emotion. "Why are you here with him?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak but then closed it again, like the words weren't coming out the way she wanted them to. She shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the door handle like she was thinking about getting out of the car and running. Steve, as always, spoke up first. "We don't have to do this right now," he said, his voice smooth but with a hint of nervousness creeping in. "We're not here to make trouble." I didn't take my eyes off Sarah. "What are you two doing here?" I repeated, louder this time, my voice cutting through the thick silence. Sarah finally spoke, her words coming out in a rushed whisper. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you. Tell me? I interrupted, my heart pounding. Tell me what? What exactly is going on between you two? I never meant for you to find out like this, Sarah said, her eyes brimming with tears now. She looked down at her hands, like she couldn't face me. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to handle it. I cut her off again, this time with a sharp breath, my frustration spilling over. He what? You've been lying to me, and now you're trying to make excuses? Steve glanced at Sarah, his gaze sharp, then back to me. It's not what you think, he said, his tone defensive. She didn't have a choice. We were trying to fix things. We both were. Fix things? I repeated incredulously. By helping him steal my house? By lying to me? How was that supposed to fix anything? Sarah's eyes welled up, but she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, clearly torn. The guilt in her expression was too much to bear. Steve put a hand up, silencing me before I could say anything else. Look, he said, his voice taking on a more controlled, almost apologetic tone. This wasn't supposed to go this far. We didn't want it to, but when the offer came through, things escalated fast. It wasn't just about the house. It was about what came with it, the opportunity. I stared at him, my mind reeling. What do you mean the opportunity? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused for a moment, then let out a frustrated breath. We were trying to get out from under a debt, he admitted, his eyes flickering nervously. You don't know what's been going on. Things got messy. And I didn't want you to get hurt. I thought if we could just get the house off the books, we could all walk away clean. But it didn't work out that way. I'm sorry. I really am. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I processed his words. I didn't know what to believe anymore. It was too much. Too much deception. Too much manipulation. The betrayal ran deeper than I ever could have imagined. But before I could respond, a car pulled up behind me. The screech of tires hitting the gravel brought me back to reality. I turned around, my heart racing, expecting to see my husband. But it wasn't him. The door to the car opened, and out stepped a man I didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit. He walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the area before he locked onto me. There was something about the way he moved, something unsettling in his calm demeanor. I felt a chill run through me. There was no mistaking it, this wasn't a coincidence. This man was here for a reason. Who's this? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of thoughts brewing in my mind. Steve turned to look at the man, then quickly back to me. This is Tony, he said, his voice suddenly tight. He's the one who's been managing things. Tony stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. We need to talk, he said, his voice low but commanding. Now. I took a step back, my heart racing in my chest. About what? I asked, suddenly feeling more vulnerable than ever. What's going on? Tony didn't answer immediately. He just looked at Steve, then back at me. There was a brief moment of silence, and then it hit me. The twist. About the real reason the house was sold, Tony finally said, his lips curling into a faint smile. And about why you're involved in something much bigger than you realize. A chill swept over me as I felt the weight of his words sink in. This was no longer just about a house. This was about something far more dangerous, something I wasn't prepared for. Before I could ask another question, Tony's phone rang. He pulled it out of his pocket and glanced at the screen. Without saying a word, he answered it. As he spoke into the phone, his eyes never left me, and I could feel the tension building again. "I'll handle it," he said into the phone. Then, to Steve, he added, "We need to leave. Now." And just like that, they both turned and walked back to their cars, leaving me standing there in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle still scattered around me. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. It had only just begun. I stood there for a moment, my eyes fixed on Tony and Steve as they retreated to their cars, the sounds of their footsteps and engines fading into the background. The air was thick with tension, a gnawing uncertainty clawing at me. I had no answers, no clear way forward, just a mess of half-truths and lies swirling around me. I couldn't make sense of it. Not yet. I turned slowly, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. The house, the property I had worked so hard to restore, the one that had once held so much promise, was no longer mine. And now, everything that had felt like a quiet betrayal was turning into something much larger, something darker. I walked back into the house, each step feeling like it was pulling me deeper into the unknown. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but the silence that followed was suffocating. I stood in the hallway, my mind racing, trying to connect the dots between everything that had happened in the last few days. The house, Steve, Sarah, and now Tony. There was something big at play here, something I couldn't fully grasp yet. I walked through the rooms, each one colder than the last. The furniture I had picked out, the paint on the walls, it was all supposed to be a new beginning. But now, it felt like a tomb, filled with all the unspoken truths that had been buried under layers of lies. I stopped in front of the kitchen window and looked out at the trees swaying in the wind. It was a beautiful evening, the last remnants of sunlight casting long shadows across the yard. But it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside me. There was no peace here. There was no going back. The phone in my pocket buzzed, jolting me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out, my heart skipping a beat when I saw the name on the screen, John. My husband. I hesitated for a second, but then I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where are you?" His voice was calm, too calm. "I've been trying to reach you. I'm almost home." I didn't know how to respond. How could I explain everything that had happened without it all sounding insane? How could I tell him that his best friend and my best friend were involved in something much bigger than we could ever have imagined? That the house was gone, that everything had been manipulated, and that the people we trusted had betrayed us? "I'm at the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something you need to know." "Just wait for me," he said, his voice laced with a hint of frustration. "I'll be there in a few minutes. We'll talk then." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. I didn't want to wait. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But I didn't know how to make him understand, how to make him see the danger we were in. "I can't wait," I said quietly. "I need to know what's going on, John. Right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear his breathing, slow and deliberate, before he finally spoke. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone now guarded. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out when I get home." I clenched my jaw. "You don't understand," I said, my voice rising. "It's already too late. This isn't something we can fix. We're in over our heads, and I need you to see that." I waited for a response, but there was only silence. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a vice. The house, my life, had been pulled out from under me, and I had no idea how to stop it. "John?" I said, my voice trembling. "I'm on my way," he replied, his voice distant. "Just stay there." I hung up before he could say anything else. I felt the room spin around me, the pressure in my chest building. I was no longer in control. And I didn't know what to do next. I paced back and forth, my thoughts a jumble of confusion and fear. Every corner of the house reminded me of what I had lost, not just the property, but the trust, the safety I thought I had. Steve, Tony, even Sarah, they had all played their part in this twisted game. But what was the end goal? What were they after? I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on something, anything, that would give me clarity. But it wasn't working. There was no escape from the truth. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. I froze, my heart racing. It was him. John was here. I hurried to the front door, my hands shaking as I turned the knob. As soon as I stepped outside, I saw him walking toward me, his face tight with worry. "John," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." He looked at me, his eyes scanning my face, looking for something I couldn't give him. "What's going on? What's happened?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I don't know how to explain it. But it's all connected. Steve, Sarah, this house, everything. We've been lied to, manipulated. It's not just about the house anymore, John. There's something bigger at play, something that's going to affect both of us. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean, something bigger?" Before I could answer, something caught my eye. Across the yard, near the trees, I saw movement, a shadow flickering in the corner of my vision. My pulse quickened, and I turned to look. Out of nowhere, a car door slammed shut, and a figure emerged from behind the trees. It wasn't Steve. It wasn't Tony. It was someone I never expected to see. Someone who hadn't been a part of this until now. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the person step forward into the fading light. It was my husband's brother. And he was holding a briefcase. I took a step back, my body going cold. He wasn't supposed to be here. None of this made sense. John turned to look at me, his face pale. "What is he doing here?" Before I could respond, my brother-in-law spoke, his voice calm and chilling. "It's time to wrap this up," he said, a slight smile curling at the corner of his lips. "Everything you've been looking for is right here." He opened the briefcase. Inside was a stack of documents, all marked with the same name, our families. And at the top of the stack, there was one document that stopped my heart cold. It was the deed to the house. But this time, it wasn't just anyone's signature on the dotted line. It was mine.